order. So that's when it gets pretty serious for people. So this is a case study of an Afghanistan man that I worked with. His father worked in an NGO and he was threatened by ISIS to leave the organization. He refused to leave the organization and his father was killed by ISIS. My client's brother then he sought revenge and he attacked the ISIS members on the street one day. They retaliated, they attacked his house, he was wounded and his brother was killed. So quite a horrific story. So he fled Afghanistan using false documentation, paid people smugglers, spent time in Calais, crossed into the UK, came to Ireland and claimed asylum in Ireland. And unfortunately, this can be a typical story, particularly from that part of the globe. So he was initially refused asylum because he couldn't prove his nationality. He had no documentation, he had no passport, he had no birth cert, he had absolutely nothing. He had a limited knowledge of his local area in Afghanistan and he didn't know the currency of Afghanistan. So he was asked, what happens in I suppose the hearings is, the first thing you have to prove is your nationality, and if you don't have a passport or birth cert or anything like that, you're just asked questions about, tell me about the local towns, the local rivers, the local currency, just to show that you actually know something about the particular country. So we argued on appeal that because he had no education, and again, this is where your I suppose adult basic education or adult literacy collides with the legal system, which was very, very useful for me, having worked in adult education for almost 20 years. Someone with my client had never been to school, so we argued that because he had a limited education, he wouldn't have known the local geography. Well, he would have known some of it, but he wouldn't have had a detailed knowledge. So they accepted that. And we also did some research and found out that in the part of Afghanistan where he actually lived, the local currency was US dollar, not the Afghan rupee. And he had said in his interview that the currency was the US dollar. And so in fact he was correct in that. So we put up those arguments, and he also had a copy of a UK visa, and they didn't accept this in his first hearing, but the appeal hearing they accepted that he would have had to have Afghan ID at some stage in order to secure this. So the appeal tribunal then agreed on the balance of probabilities that he was Afghani, using, I suppose, the arguments that we had presented. So once we'd got over the hurdle of proving his nationality, the next part of it was pretty straightforward. He had medical reports that he'd gotten in Ireland that were consistent with being in an explosion. He had also physical evidence of wounds with photographic evidence. We also had a psychological report from Sperassi, which was hugely useful. And we could also show that there was a state protection in Afghanistan. So he was granted refugee status. So that was a positive outcome. The second case then I'm going to look at is a Pakistani female who married a man outside of her caste. She was threatened by her family. She and her husband came to Ireland in 2014 using a tourist visa to come in. They were both working here. And then her partner got involved in a road traffic accident, and the Gardaí got involved, as they do, or obviously as they have to in road traffic accidents. And they discovered that he was in the country illegally. So they sought asylum and claimed that they had been threatened in their own country. They were refused in their first interview, and they were also refused on appeal, because one of the things with international protection is that you have to seek asylum as soon as you land in the country, or as soon as possible. You can't wait. They waited 3 years, so that worked against them. There was no evidence whatsoever of threats or police reports. Now, any of these on their own won't be detrimental to a case, but when you have a lot of things working against you, it's very difficult to get a case through. When they went to their hearing, they were both called in one after the other, and their stories were actually different. There was quite a lot of discrepancies in their stories, so that affects their credibility. And also, if you do research on Pakistan, even though it mightn't be the greatest police system in the world, there is an adequate and good police system there, so state protection was available to them. So all of these issues worked against them. So as I said, any one of these wouldn't be detrimental to a case, but when you have a lot of issues like this stacked against you, it's difficult to get asylum. So there's two case studies, one which was pretty straightforward once we got the nationality issue proven. Second one was more difficult because the story just didn't stack up. Now, quite possible that the second story was was perfectly valid and perfectly true, but they just didn't meet the threshold for getting refugee status or even subsidiary protection. So that is the asylum system, which was the main part of this particular presentation.